Astro 5 just dropped, and while it's not the biggest update they've done, it has some really awesome, important new pieces and a few things that I don't think any framework's really done before. Obviously, I'm the Next.js guy. You probably know me for that. But Astro is the only other framework I'm currently shipping in production. I use it for things like my blog, random docs. We use it all over Create T3 app. That doesn't mean Astro is a solution that you should use instead of Next for everything, but these are both solutions to a lot of problems, and they both learn from each other, and the whole ecosystem gets to move forward. So whether you're an Astro dev, a Next dev, a Nux dev, a Vite dev, or you're still on Create React app for some reason, there's a lot of good stuff to learn here. So make sure you stick around. But first, a quick commercial break. Today's sponsor is PostHog, and if your product has no users, you can probably safely skip this section. But for everyone else, you really should consider PostHog. They might be paying me for this time, but they're not paying me for my opinion. And my opinion is almost everyone should be using PostHog. I've been using them for well over 2 years now, way before I ever reached out to them to sponsor, which, by the way, they didn't hit me up. I'm the only person they've ever sponsored, and they're doing it because I asked them to, because I know you guys will like what they built. They're an all-in-one suite of product tools. They have everything you need, from feature flags to analytics to session replays to surveys to so much more. I have been surprised how many of these tools I've ended up using. But if you're skeptical of throwing everything into one black box, don't be. It's not a black box. Whole thing's open source, so you can do whatever you want to do. If you want to host it yourself in the future, you're not stuck on their platform. But honestly, the more I've learned about them, the more I've seen their goofy, wonderful brand, and the more I've relied on them for my own products. Yes, all of my products use PostHog. The easier it is to recommend. I think you'll be surprised. And if you're curious yourself, you should just go give the free tier a shot. It's hilariously generous. Over 90% of companies don't end up needing to pay at all. So yeah, give them a shot. Thank you to PostHog for sponsoring today's video. Check them out at soydev.link/PostHog. Anyways, Astro 5 is here, and I am very, very hyped for this release. Introducing Astro 5.0. With the Astro content layer to load content from any source, as well as server islands to combine cached static content with dynamic personalized content. Read on to learn more about these powerful new features and more. By the way, disclosure, I have been so close with the Astro team for so long that I am officially an advisor, which means I do have some Astro stock. So there is bias here. I think of it differently. I think that I like Astro so much and they respect me so much that we have this relationship where I get stock, but obviously I'm going to be more biased towards the thing I have stock in than when I don't. Read my bias however you choose. I like Astro enough to use my time to advise them. Anyways, first and foremost, what is Astro? Hopefully you know by now that Astro is the ultimate static framework that takes advantage of new tools. The way I've personally thought of Astro is it brings the cool learnings and powerful tools that we've gotten used to in like the React world over to the static generation of pages world. I would get frustrated using something like React for a blog, but I would get more frustrated trying to do it the right way with static stuff. Astro lets me generate HTML using whatever tools I'm used to using with a really good dev experience. And there's a reason it has quickly won in the blogging world, a bunch of the e-commerce world, and these more static-focused experiences. In their words, Astro is the web framework for building content-driven websites, including blogs, marketing, and e-commerce. If you need a website that loads fast with great SEO, Astro is probably the right choice for you. This release has some really cool highlights, including the content layer stuff, the server island stuff, simplified pre-rendering, type-safe environment variables, Vite 6, and experimental features. I am genuinely really excited for a lot of these. Server islands is going to be the most mind-blowing, so please make sure you stick around for that part. But all of this is very exciting. And the content layer part is something I've actually pushed a lot in my advisory with them because it's one of the coolest things we lost with Gatsby that is really important for these new frameworks to be successful. It looks like they also have an upgrade command now, which is cool. I'm going to run this at the end of the video on my Astro site to see if it works or not. So make sure you stick to the end for that. First, we need to look at the content layer stuff, though. Astro is the best framework for content-driven sites, and with Astro 5, we're making it even better. The Astro content layer is a new, flexible, and pluggable way to manage content, providing a unified type-safe API to define, load, and access your content in your Astro project, no matter where it came from. The use case for something like this is you have an old data source or a data source that isn't really built for TypeScript, be it something like an old WordPress blog, a Notion database, some weird Google Sheets API, and you want to get that into a new static site with better dev tools. Gatsby kind of went all in on this, but they did it a very strange way. They did it with GraphQL, where you would have a TypeScript function that ran on your build or in servers that would fetch data from something like WordPress, shape it as a GraphQL schema. You would then, on the client side, hit that GraphQL schema to get the data you wanted, dealing with all the nullability and shit that exists in GraphQL, to get all that data into the React code to then generate a static site. There were just so many back and forths and so many conversions from WordPress's API to TypeScript on the server to GraphQL back to TypeScript on the client, but it's actually running on the build. It was a mess. But the idea of a unified layer that lets you access data in a type-safe way, regardless of the source, that idea is not kind of good. It's really good. And it's essential if we want to move these old WordPress sites into the modern era without losing all of our old content. And now it is just part of Astro. The content layer is huge, and I'm really excited that it finally shipped. Gatsby's already literally dead, but this is the thing that brings the best parts of it. And if you look at the code, you'll hopefully understand why. We have this package, the Notion Astro loader globs with the pattern for all markdown files, and it has this base source data blog. But we also have the database, which is a collection using the Notion loader. Then we have countries, which is another collection that is loaded through api.example.com/countries, and then we JSON it. So now we have these three collections that exist within our Astro app that we can access however we need to as we build our app. Huge. So cool that if we had our marketing site and we wanted to port our old WordPress blog to it, you would just add the WordPress Astro loader, add const legacy blog equals define collection, and now you have access to that in your pages. Previously, the way it worked was just dumping a bunch of stuff into markdown files in your repo. So if you wanted a CMS to have some static sections of your site powered by a REST API, or to have optimized images coming from an asset management system, it would get messy quick, and the loaders solves that problem. You can use the built-in loaders to load content from anywhere on disk, define your own loaders that fetch content from any API in just a few lines of code, and you can use any of the existing community-built loaders like Storyblock, Cloudinary, HighGraph. Let's see if the important one is here. Tool for migrating WordPress to Astro. Look at that. You got the Pocket-based loader, Sheet loader. This is for Google Sheets. Good luck getting an API key from them, but again, this makes a ton of sense. I cannot imagine another tool where it would be easier to turn something like a Google Sheet or an old WordPress site into a new static HTML experience without compromising on your dev experience. So you see here we have the loaders for all our static stuff, our Markdown, our JSON, whatever else. CMS goes through a loader, API goes through a loader. You now have the one unified store you can access everything from. This is huge. They also made some huge performance improvements here. The biggest argument against Astro in comparison to other static generation tools is that since it does everything in JS, it's not as fast as some of those alternatives, but it's getting really fast now. 5x faster builds for Markdown pages on content-heavy sites and up to 2 times faster for MDX. Nice. Not that the builds were slow, but when you had a huge site, they weren't as fast as I would have liked. It's fixed. But here is the biggest part. I've talked about it a bit before, but I'm not going to miss the opportunity to go in depth because server islands is so cool. Server islands are an evolution of the islands architecture concept that Astro helped bring to the mainstream. I'll do a real quick overview of islands. If you have a website with like a header and an image carousel, which are both interactive, but everything else is static, and you're using React, your React bundle now has to come in and load all of these pieces in JavaScript in order for this to work. Islands are the idea that everything is static and doesn't require JavaScript unless it's an interactive piece. And then each of those interactive pieces live on their own island where they don't directly interface with other things. Maybe there's a greater store that they're all hitting in like global or whatever. But the idea is that these pieces can be isolated islands that don't need the whole site to be one JavaScript framework to work. And these islands don't have to be in Astro. In fact, they can't be because Astro doesn't do client anything. You bring in the JS framework of your choice. And they support pretty much all of them. It supports everything from React to Vue to Svelte to even Angular, last I saw. I know Solid works really well. In fact, Solid Start used to be based on Astro. It's really powerful for a thing that's mostly static with a few dynamic parts. You know, like a blog or an e-commerce site. The new Next.js patterns enable a lot of the wins that exist here, but nowhere near the same power of the mindset. And it also is a bit more complex because of the way everything interweaves in server components, where here it's very almost like boringly linear top to bottom, where from this element down, it is now a dynamic component. Everything above it is just part of the Astro world. But what's cool is when you mount a React component for your header or for your image carousel, you can tell Astro, run this on the server and just put it in a static HTML, or run it on the server, but also send the JS to the client, or don't run it on the server, only run it on the client. You get a lot of flexibility in how Astro treats the island, but you do have to architect with these islands, which prevents things like multiple components in the same tree that are being shared between things. You just have to do that all in the React or other framework layer yourself. Astro doesn't give you that composability. It lets you do it yourself however you want, benefits and negatives. Someone in chat just asked, could you use Astro to make a site that uses every major framework? You could. Good luck. And also, as I was saying, like if you want to compose these, you can't like put an Angular component inside of a React component using Astro. Once you mount the React component, from there down, it's all just React. So you have to be considerate of that when you do it, but you can pass it props from Astro to React. So balances, benefits, negatives. It's a cool thing when you need it, but it also lets you rethink things that are mostly static. A harsh reality was that a lot of people were using React because they had this image carousel. Even though the rest of the site didn't need it, they would have the whole thing in React now. Islands helps prevent those things. If a site should be static, but one part shouldn't be, this is the best architecture to solve that problem. But we're not here to talk about islands in the traditional client-side sense that we just went through. That was almost misleading to be so focused on that, because what we're here to talk about today is server islands, which is a very different way of thinking about stuff. I'm going to start this section by talking about Next, because Next.js introduced a feature called partial pre-rendering that is very similar in its goals. If I have a website that is mostly static, let's say it's a e-commerce site, most of the things on that page are going to be the same for everyone, but some will be different. The cart's going to be different. The recommendations are going to be different. The shipping information is going to be different. So why do I have to wait for the server to generate the whole page if a lot of the page is static? Partial pre-rendering is a feature in Next where you can generate and cache the part that's the same for everyone, and then stream that down immediately when the user goes to the page, and then have the rest fast follow up after when it's ready. So it's all part of one stream, one request the user makes. The static part comes through really fast, and the rest gets streamed in when it's ready. The benefit here is that it's all one request, and you don't have to worry about the static parts being blocked by the dynamic parts. And that's the goal here, to not block the static part on the part that is unique to a given user. So this is cool, but it requires some crazy infra hacks because you need to set your server up so that it can intercept the request, send down the static part, and while holding that same connection, slowly stream in the rest of the stuff when it's ready. That is an infra feature as much as it is a framework feature, and getting PPR working on things that aren't Vercel or Netlify is not a fun experience. Astro saw the benefits of PPR, but they didn't want to force you to have this complex architecture where the server responds with two different sources. One is the static part and one's the dynamic part, all as part of one complex streamed request. Server islands are almost an inversion of this way of solving the problem with the goal of solving the same problem. Instead of having a server that sends down the CDN part and then follows up with the stream part, now the CDN gives you the static part, completes the request, it loads a little bit of JS. That little bit of JS requests to your Astro server, hey, I need a little bit more information. Can I have it, please? And then it sends the rest down to get swapped into those individual parts. The benefit here is you can deploy this the way that we've always deployed static stuff by throwing it on S3 and maybe giving it a CDN with CloudFront or Cloudflare without having to do the complexity of the request mingling. And we still get pretty close to the same performance we saw with Next partial pre-rendering, if not better in many cases. It's a really cool solution that allows you to get that benefit without going all in on very tailor-made specific infrastructure. Now you can throw the Astro part on any node server and the static parts on any CDN, and it just works. That's awesome. Having a framework primitive that lets you say, okay, everything above here is a static site that goes into CDN. And when you want to load these parts, these have to come from a server. I like their framing here for server islands. On any given page, you might have content that is completely static and never changes, some content that's dynamically backed by a database that changes infrequently, but more often than you do deployments, as well as some personalized content, which is tailored to individual users. All three of these have entirely different optimal solutions. The static parts should be on a CDN. The dynamic parts should be on a CDN with an invalidation or a static revalidation pattern. And the personalized content should be fully dynamic on request. The issue before is that as you went down this chain, you would usually give up the benefits of being higher up. The reality is we want our things to be as close to the top as possible. We want our stuff to be static because the higher up here you are, the faster things are. If you're completely static, it's super fast. If you're mostly static but revalidate, it's pretty fast but has more compute and sometimes things are stale. And if it's fully dynamic, you have to wait for the server to generate on every single request. Sadly, if you have just one personalized part like the cart in your e-commerce site, with pretty much every architecture that's existed in the history of the web, you have now forced your entire site to be dynamic. So even if the rest of the content is static, just one dynamic piece means the whole page now has to be loaded in a dynamic way, which means every request a user makes going forward is now significantly slower. But what if the static parts could stay static and we bring in these different dynamic patterns for the elements it makes sense for, not the routes or the pages it makes sense for? Dynamic shouldn't be a route level concern. It should be a component level concern. And that's what's really cool here. As they say, previously you had to choose one caching strategy for all of your content types. And if the page is a logged in experience, that usually would mean no caching at all. Now with Server Islands, you get the best of both worlds. The things that are the same for everyone can be fully static. The things that are unique for everyone can be fully unique and dynamic. The goal here, and you're going to see this pattern more and more as new frameworks are adjusting to these patterns and the cool stuff that's going on in the React Next world, our goal is to make as much of our site as static as possible because CDNs will always be faster than running a server. And it's really cool to see frameworks like Astro acknowledging that there are things that have to be dynamic. And instead of pretending it's not a problem or forcing you to do it on the client side, we can just load those parts in when they're ready. Server Islands are used for your most dynamic content, personalized content like a user avatar, their shopping cart, and product reviews. While these components are deferred, you're free to more aggressively cache the page itself. That means that if a user's logged in or not, they will still see most of the critical parts of the page instantly, as they are cached on Edge CDNs. You can also set custom fallback content to show briefly before the dynamic islands are loaded. Think of this like the fallback with a suspense in React. Each island is loaded independently to optimize the visitor experience. This means a slower island, like one connected to a legacy backend, won't delay the rest of the personalized content from being seen and interacted with. Also a big thing. The biggest problem with the all dynamic thing is if you have one element that takes half a second, one that takes a third of a second, but then one that takes 3 seconds, the whole page takes those 3 seconds. If you use any sites that are really slow, like AngelList is one I use a lot, that's disgustingly slow. The reason is it's generating all of the things it has to for the page. It doesn't show you something when the fast parts are done. It shows you nothing until all of them are done. It's kind of like a chain's as strong as its weakest link. A page is as slow as its slowest element. Now, things come in when they're ready instead of when everything else is done. But that also means you have to be careful because you might end up in loading spinner hell if you don't plan accordingly around this. They've been shipping Server Islands for a bit and they got really useful feedback that they've applied, such as the ability to set headers inside of an island, which allows you to customize the cache lifetime of an individual island. That's actually really cool. To say like the reviews on an e-commerce site, that only needs to be revalidated every day. But maybe you want the cart to be never cached ever. You want that to be like invalidated whenever you request it. Being able to do that on an individual island level is really, really powerful. I've seen a little bit of this through, believe it or not, Netlify. They have a cool header called Netlify Vary that lets you split the places that you're getting cache data from based on conditions in things like your cookies, the request, the time of day, those types of things, where you're basically telling the page which CDN to get stuff from and which static asset to pull based on something more dynamic. And what Astro's enabled here with island level headers is a more granular version of that. And I'd be surprised if like on Netlify, they weren't using a lot of those custom Netlify headers to make this possible. In fact, I would bet that a combination of things like the Netlify Vary headers and Astro could make something like stupid performant. Ooh, you can also use Server Islands on platforms that do automatic page compression. That's cool. I'm not surprised this broke things in the past, but I'm hyped that they found a fix for it because that is the thought of your CDN or your web host doing gzip and Brotli stuff for you automatically, causing the diffs to not fit right. That doesn't surprise me, but I'm happy they found a solution to it. They also automatically encrypt server island props using a key generated by the server. Oh, that's good. Next had this problem with server actions. I'm happy they found a solution in Astro as well. But again, it's like they're taking, and this is what I like about tools like Astro. There's a lot of tools that exist in spite of the existing alternatives. Like, I'm going to get in trouble for talking about it, but Ladybird doesn't exist because they see things that are cool in the existing browsers and they want to do cool stuff on top, or they have a specific thing they want to fix. It exists because they don't like the companies making the other browsers and they just want to do it from scratch. Astro wants to make the web better and make building for the web better. So when other tools come from other companies like Next.js, they don't look at it and say, well, no one ever will want that. We're going to keep doing our thing. They look and say, oh, there are really useful parts. And within those parts, there are really useful solutions to problems they encountered. And they're taking those lessons and those learnings and those value adds and bringing them to devs that aren't using Next for any of many totally valid reasons. It's awesome to see tools that aren't the most popular tool not pretend that the popular tool is always bad, but actually learn the lessons that they're learning and applying them to their own context. It's really cool to see. It's one of my favorite things about Astro and the Astro team. One of my good friends on the Astro team, Maple, who's hanging out in chat right now, was a remix guy. Like, they're real deep in the remix community. So they brought a lot of those lessons to Astro, as many of the others on the team have. With Astro 5, we are rethinking what it means for a site to be static. Server islands provide a foundational primitive for how you build static projects in Astro in the future, with dynamic bits only when you need them. To learn more about server islands, you can check out the Server Island Guide. I also did a more in-depth video on them. Hopefully you've gotten what you need to here. Links in the description if you want to check out this guide, though. Really cool stuff. And remember, we're going to update my site to Astro 5 at the end, so stick to then if you want to see how hard it is to upgrade. They also simplified pre-rendering. Since Astro's 1.0 release, Astro supported multiple output modes for websites. Static, when you want to just generate HTML files, as well as server, when you want the pages to be dynamic and run at runtime instead. Funny enough, previously, you had to opt your whole app into static, where it would generate HTML, or dynamic, but I would often have routes I wanted to be static and routes I wanted to be dynamic, so I complained a lot, and they fixed it really fast. But fun, weird, chaotic time. I was real frustrated, and this happens a lot, where there are two cool things a tool does, and I can't do both at the same time. It annoys me to no end, and they took that problem seriously, and they went out of their way to address it since. After many requests, in Astro 2, they made it more granular by creating a third output mode, hybrid, which lets you have some things be static and dynamic, which is, again, from me complaining so much, and I'm sure others too. It was the obvious thing they need to do, but I was loud about that. I even had an interview with Fred from Astro where I just roasted him for this, and he realized, oh yeah, you're right, we should fix that. As Astro grew and gained more powerful features like actions on server islands, which cannot be used in a purely static output mode, we realized that the matrix of what settings do I need to use this feature became large and tiresome to explain and document. We also found that people ended up server rendering more than they needed to because it was easier than to use the fine-grained controls, which resulted in their sites being slower than they had to be. With Astro 5, we're happy to say we've simplified all of this. The hybrid and static options have been merged into the default static option. Yes, this is always what I wanted. Thank you. It's funny. I would argue this is them beating Next.js to the punch with dynamic I/O, where the goal is to have the static parts always be static and things you do in your code tell the framework when to start being dynamic. So assume static until you hit some boundary that says, hey, this part's dynamic, then do that dynamic, leave everything else as static. We are there in Astro now. Huge. This allows you to render individual routes at runtime on the server just by adding an adapter. No more configuration is needed. Fear not, if you still want good old statically generated HTML, you still get them. Astro is still static by default. But if you set pre-render false on a given page, Astro now dynamically switches its output mode, which allows you to use features that require SSR without figuring out which config mode that you need. Awesome. And if you combine that with server islands, you can just make everything static and then have certain parts that are treated dynamic. Huge. Awesome. A++. Interesting. Astro and V. More T3 inspired stuff. If you're not familiar, there's a package that Julius made for T3 and Create T3 app that's now gone way further, T3 environment, which lets you use Zod to validate your environment variables so you can access them in a type safe and runtime safe way. And it gives you errors during build if you're missing environment variables, which makes setting things up and accessing them from different code bases and different developers way easier. And it seems like they've built this into Astro, which is awesome. I don't think T3 and V should have to exist, but no frameworks take these problems seriously, so it does. And I've seen this package used way outside of the React and Next ecosystem. I've seen it in a bunch of solid code bases. So it's cool to see Astro taking this opportunity to make Astro better. In a lot of ways, you could say Astro is copying stuff we did in T3, like from the CLI to the plugin architecture to the environment stuff. I love that. I genuinely really, really like that they see the DX wins that exist elsewhere and they bring them into the framework itself, so you don't have to know about all these things to have a good experience. I love this. I would never accuse them of copying or stealing. I see this as good ideas being proliferated. Oh, that's actually really nice. You can specify if a variable should be client or server. We have that too with T3 and V, but at a framework level, that's a really nice thing to have. You could also designate certain variables as secrets, like API keys that you would never want to have exposed ever. So you can be real strict with like a thing that says that, as well as specifying if a variable is required or just optional, which lets you catch mistakes before the server is booted, as well as defining a type of a variable, like it has to be a string, a number, a URL that matches a certain pattern, all those types of things. Huge. And now you can just import Stripe API key from Astro env server. Huge. A++. I want to see every framework copying this. Astro 5 is one of the first frameworks to ship with Vite 6. Awesome. If you haven't already seen my Vite 6 video, probably worth checking out because the changes are very relevant here. They've been working on the beta versions of Vite for a while, so it's not like they just rushed to this. They've been playing with the new Vite 6 and environment API stuff for a bit. Now it's just ready to go. The highlight of Vite 6 is the environment API, which, as I said, talk about a bunch in the video. TLDR, so it makes it easier to determine how the code runs at different places, different environments, be it Edge, Node, pre-render with build, client side, all the above. Much more flexibility there. They're excited because they think they can get better compatibility with things like Cloudflare and other Edge runtimes, as well as running those locally. Awesome. I'm into it. Ooh, responsive images and SVG. Let's see what they have here for us. Image cropping support. That is interesting. I haven't seen any framework do this, where when you set a fit with a width and height, it crops out the things that don't fit, so you don't have to send the whole image just to render a bit of it. So like, let's say this image was 1,000 by 1,000, and we told it to do 200 by 200. It's just going to render part of the image, but we still have to send the whole image. Now, using the Sharp plugin on the server, they will regenerate the image so it only uses the parts that are being shown in the UI. That's awesome. That goes way further than the next image component does. To be fair, I find the use case of intentionally cropping a large asset via the way you style it on the client to be relatively rare, but this is really cool. Next image does not do that now. Next image just optimizes the image based on the dimensions and the platform. It will resize the image, but it won't crop. The cropping is the difference here. They also added a responsive layout. Getting responsive images using these optimized image components is obnoxious. When they resize themselves based on the space, you never really know how big it's going to end up being, so you don't know what sizes to render it at. Apparently, they have the ability to predefine responsive image layouts. They'll automatically generate the proper source set and sizes values to make your images look good and perform well on all devices. So if you say layout responsive, when it sees which devices this can render on, it will do scaled versions of the image based on that. Awesome. Experimental. SVG component. Did you ever wish it was easier to use SVGs in Astro? I've been to hell and back. I've been so far to hell and back for this. Yeah, I'm happy that this made it in. Funny enough, SVG support was one of like the earliest cool things in Create React app, as well as in Webpack. And because Webpack didn't have a core feature for it, we all did it in our own weird, increasingly hacky ways. I'm happy we've learned from our mistakes, and now we have it in Astro V5, because if they had done this even in 1 or 2, they might have done it wrong, because we were all doing it wrong at the time. Looks like you can just import an SVG and use it like a component, and it just works now. Awesome. A+, overdue. Obviously, there's bug fixes and more, but what's most important is how well can I upgrade this in my code base. Here is t3.gg. You might have heard of this before. Probably not, but whatever. I am using Astro for it. I am very curious what happens when I update it. Cool. I'm curious what version I'm running right now, because up until like last year, I think, I was on the pre 1.0 of Astro, and I did the update to 3, and it just kind of worked. When's the history on this? I think I uninstalled the plugin that tells me. I uninstalled Git Lens, so I can't easily see. I can on GitHub, though. Apparently, I didn't upgrade in order to fix something that was broken in Safari last year, but before then, it had been 2 years. So I'm not like actively updating the version of Astro I'm using. So let's see how well it does 2 major jumps. Everything's up to date. Have fun building. Bets on if this works first try. Browser list is outdated. That's fine. I'll fix that in a sec. It looks like it just worked. Do view transitions still work? It looks like they do. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I need to post on my blog more. It's been a minute. Astro.glob is deprecated and it will be removed in a future major version. Use import.meta.glob instead. Let's see if I just swap that, if it's fine. Now the errors are starting. Oh, it comes through as a record now. Also, Prettier is failing. Of course it is. Did it not update the Prettier plugin? Why wouldn't it update that as part of the update process? Also, like I know, Astro guys, you don't want to like bet on Prettier. You should. It is such a bad experience to not have formatting now that it's just, it should be deeply considered in your templates, especially with Tailwind. Like if you're using Tailwind and you're not using the Prettier plugin for Tailwind, you're using Tailwind wrong. And it's not just like suboptimal DX, but your users are getting a worse experience because things can't be gzipped as well if the classes aren't in the right order. Nope, still getting a Prettier error. It's because of the Tailwind plugin. Again, like these are the things that it seems scary to update those plugins because they're not Astro's plugins. I think it's important. Let's see. Still erroring. I have to change the Prettier plugin Astro to use a dynamic import. Why is this my problem? Cool. Can I get Prettier working? I did it. I did it by moving off of a JS Prettier config, which I had to have because Astro didn't support the standard config at the time, and now it does, but nothing indicated that. The CLI should have told me. Fixed. I did it, Reddit. Updated to latest. Astro. Look at that. Whole thing built in 16 seconds. 24 total for the deploy and everything. And my site is now running Astro 5.0. Not that you would notice as the user, because the site is a static HTML site. There is really nothing Astro-y being loaded beyond a tiny bit of JS in order to make page transitions and view transitions work. Here we are. Pretty cool. I am very happy with this release, even if I had to fight Prettier. I'm sure they'll smooth that out after seeing this, so check the pinned comment. I'm going to leave an update once I know if they fixed that or not. Not that it's their problem, but Astro loves to solve things that aren't their problem, so fingers crossed. That's all I got for now. Let me know what you think and how hyped you are for Server Islands. I know this is a really cool release. Until next time, peace nerds.